The city lights outside were beautiful that night, but inside the quiet room the atmosphere felt completely different. The air was heavy. The silence felt louder than words. Two people sat across from each other, while untouched cups rested on the table between them. Nobody expected the conversation would become one of the most emotional moments of the night. Before you continue reading, stay until the end, because what happened after Miles finally spoke left Joseph silent and changed everything. If this story touches your heart, share your thoughts, because sometimes the hardest battles are the ones people fight quietly inside themselves. Joseph Zeng sat near the window, looking lost in thought. His expression carried the weight of someone holding on to memories that refused to disappear. The bright city outside kept moving as usual, but inside him time felt frozen. Across from him sat Miles Wei.
Calm.
Watching. Thinking. For several minutes neither of them spoke. The silence stretched longer. Finally Miles leaned forward. His voice was quiet but serious. "Joseph, maybe it is time." Joseph slowly looked up. "Time for what?" Miles took a breath. "Time to let her go." The room immediately felt colder. Joseph said nothing. Miles continued. "You keep waiting for something that may never arrive. You keep protecting memories that only live inside your heart." Joseph looked away. His hands tightened slightly. The words were painful because somewhere deep inside, he already knew them. Miles lowered his voice even more. "Maybe Bai Lu never saw things the way you did. Maybe what meant everything to you was only a passing moment to her." Joseph remained silent. Outside, the city lights reflected against the glass like tiny stars scattered across the night. Inside the room, emotions quietly grew heavier. Joseph finally spoke. His voice sounded tired. "What if I cannot let go?" Miles looked directly at him. Then he answered. "What if holding on is the reason you cannot move forward?" The words stayed in the room. Neither man moved. Joseph closed his eyes for a moment. Memories started returning. The smiles. The conversations. The moments that felt special. The quiet hopes he never spoke aloud. Everything came back at once. Miles watched him carefully. He understood. Because sometimes people do not fall in love with reality. Sometimes they fall in love with possibilities. And possibilities can become the hardest thing to leave behind. The room remained silent. Joseph stood and walked toward the window. Below them, the streets were alive. Cars moved.
People laughed.
The world continued. Yet his own world felt paused. Miles joined him.
He spoke again.
"You gave your attention. You gave your emotions. You gave your time. But maybe she never carried the same feelings." Joseph looked down. His reflection stared back at him through the glass. Miles continued. "Not every smile becomes a promise. Not every connection becomes forever. And not every story reaches the ending we imagine." Joseph quietly asked, "Then why does it hurt so much?" Miles smiled sadly. "Because you cared honestly. And honest feelings always leave marks inside the heart." The answer stayed with him. For a long time neither of them spoke. The night outside became darker. The city lights shined brighter. Inside the room something slowly changed. Joseph sat back down. This time he looked calmer. Not healed. Not completely. But different. Miles noticed immediately. He leaned back and continued. "You know what people get wrong?" Joseph looked at him. Miles spoke softly. "People think letting go means losing. But sometimes letting go is choosing yourself again." Joseph listened carefully. For the first time that night, he was not fighting the words. He was hearing them. Miles continued. "Imagine spending years standing beside a closed door, hoping it opens. Meanwhile, another path waits behind you. Another beginning. Another chapter. Another happiness. But you never see it because your eyes stay fixed on what was never yours to keep." Joseph lowered his head. Those words hit differently. The room no longer felt heavy. It felt honest. The kind of honesty people avoid because it hurts. Yet it also heals. Joseph finally smiled slightly. A small smile, barely visible, but real. Miles noticed. He smiled too. Outside, the rain had started. Soft drops touched the window while city lights turned into glowing reflections. The atmosphere became strangely peaceful. Joseph looked outside again. This time the city felt different. Larger, brighter, full of possibilities. He quietly said, "Maybe I held on because I was afraid." Miles nodded. "Afraid of what?" Joseph answered slowly. "Afraid that letting go means the story never mattered." Miles immediately shook his head.
No.
A story does not lose value because it ends. Some stories exist to change us. Some arrive to teach us. Some leave, so we can become stronger. And some remain beautiful even when they are over. Joseph became quiet again. But this silence was different. It was no longer filled with pain. It carried understanding. The night moved on. The rain continued. The city lights shimmered. Inside that room, two people sat together while one chapter quietly closed. No dramatic ending. No shouting. No tears. Only truth. Only acceptance. Only the difficult beauty of moving forward. As they prepared to leave, Miles placed a hand on Joseph's shoulder. One final sentence. "You deserve someone who chooses you without hesitation. Someone who stays. Someone who sees your worth immediately. Never forget that." Joseph looked at him. This time he smiled properly. Small. Tired. But real. And for the first time in a long while, the future no longer looked empty. It looked open. Full of roads he had not walked. Full of moments he had not lived. Full of people he had not met. Sometimes the hardest goodbye is not to another person. Sometimes it is saying goodbye to the version of yourself that kept waiting. If this story touched your heart, remember this. Holding on can be beautiful, but knowing when to let go can become even more powerful. Because somewhere tonight someone is looking out of a window holding memories they cannot release. And maybe they also need to hear these words. You are allowed to move forward. You are allowed to choose peace. And you are allowed to begin again. The rain had already stopped, but the streets outside still carried the shine of the night. Tiny reflections of city lights danced across the road while the world quietly moved forward. Inside the room, Joseph remained standing near the window long after Miles had finished speaking. The words refused to leave his mind. You deserve someone who chooses you without hesitation. Again and again those words returned. Not loudly, not painfully, just quietly, like a truth waiting patiently to be accepted. Miles picked up his jacket and prepared to leave, but before reaching the door he stopped. He looked back one final time. Joseph still had not moved. The silence between them felt emotional. Miles spoke softly. This is not the end of your story. Then he left. The door closed. And suddenly Joseph was alone. The room felt larger now. Too large. The empty chair across from him somehow looked heavier than before. He sat down slowly. His eyes moved across the table, where two cups still remained untouched. The night had become quiet. Very quiet. For the first time in months, there was no argument inside his heart. No desperate hope. No imaginary future. Only questions. Who was he without the dream he had carried for so long? What happens when the person you waited for slowly becomes a memory? How do you continue walking when your heart spent so much time standing still? He looked outside again. Far below, people were still moving through the streets. Laughing.
Talking.
Living. Life had not stopped. Only he had. That realization hit him deeply. Suddenly memories returned again. Not the dramatic moments. Not the emotional scenes. The small things. Simple smiles. Brief conversations. Passing moments he once turned into bigger meanings. He realized something painful. Maybe he had fallen in love with possibility. Maybe he had built a future inside his own heart without knowing if another heart was building the same one. The thought hurt, but it also brought strange peace. Hours passed. The city grew quieter. Joseph finally stood and left the building. Cold air touched his face immediately. The night streets stretched endlessly ahead. He walked without destination. No calls. No music. Only footsteps. The world around him looked different. Not because it changed, because he had. He passed a small coffee shop, still open late into the night. Inside, people sat talking softly. Some laughed. Some stared out windows. Everyone seemed to carry their own story. Joseph stopped outside. For several seconds, he simply watched. Then he went inside. He chose a seat near the corner. A warm drink arrived. Steam slowly rose into the air. For the first time in many months, he was sitting somewhere without checking memories in his mind, without replaying old moments, without asking what could have been. Across the room, an elderly man sat reading quietly. After a while, the man looked up and smiled. Joseph returned the smile politely. Unexpectedly, the man spoke. "Long night." Joseph nodded. "Very long." The man smiled gently. "Sometimes long nights give people answers mornings cannot." Joseph froze. The sentence felt strangely familiar, almost like life had decided to continue the conversation Miles started earlier. The old man continued reading. Nothing more. No explanation. Yet those words stayed. Joseph finished his drink and left. The sky had begun changing. The first light of morning slowly touched the city. He walked toward a bridge overlooking the river. The water moved peacefully below. He stood there alone. The cold wind brushed past him. Then something unexpected happened. He smiled. Not because the pain disappeared, not because everything was fixed, because he finally understood. Letting go was never about forgetting. It was about releasing the version of life that only existed inside imagination. His heart felt lighter. For the first time, he whispered the words out loud. "I am ready." The river carried the sound away. Morning arrived completely. The city awakened. Cars returned. People filled the streets. Life moved again. And this time Joseph moved with it. Days passed. Then weeks. Something slowly changed. He started saying yes to invitations again. He laughed more. He stayed out longer. He stopped looking backward every hour. Miles noticed immediately. One afternoon they met again. This time the atmosphere felt different. Lighter. Healthier. Miles smiled the moment he saw him. Joseph looked better. Calmer. There was peace in his eyes. They sat together. Coffee between them. No heavy silence anymore. Miles spoke first.
"How are you?"
Joseph looked outside the window. Then smiled. "Still healing. But walking." Miles nodded proudly. "That is enough." Joseph laughed quietly. Then his expression became thoughtful. "Do you know what I realized?" Miles waited. Joseph continued. "I kept thinking losing someone meant losing happiness. But happiness was never inside another person. It was inside me the whole time." Miles smiled. "Exactly." The conversation continued for hours. No sadness. No painful memories. Only growth. Only understanding. Only two people watching the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Months later, Joseph returned to the same bridge. The city looked beautiful. The river still moved. The wind still carried quiet sounds through the air. Everything looked the same. Yet everything had changed. He stood there smiling. Not because the past disappeared, because it no longer controlled him. He remembered every moment, every hope, every dream, and he thanked them silently. They hurt him, but they also shaped him. The sky above turned golden. Sunlight spread across the water. The world felt peaceful. Joseph took one final look at the city, then turned and walked forward. No hesitation. No looking back. Only steps toward a future waiting patiently for him. Because sometimes the ending people fear most becomes the beginning they needed all along. And somewhere far behind him remained an old version of himself. The one who waited. The one who hoped endlessly. The one who stood beside closed doors. He left that version behind gently. Not with anger. Not with regret. With gratitude. Because that version survived enough pain to become stronger. The road ahead stretched endlessly. And for the first time, he was ready to walk it. If you stayed until this moment, then remember this. Not every story ends with people staying together. Sometimes stories end with people finding themselves again. Sometimes love becomes a lesson. Sometimes goodbye becomes growth. And sometimes the most beautiful ending is simply this. You finally choose yourself. The city lights would shine again tomorrow. New mornings would come. New people would appear. New memories would be created. Life would continue. And so would he. This was not the end. It was the first page of a new story. One written not with waiting, but with courage. not with sadness, but with hope. And somewhere ahead, a new chapter was already waiting for him.